Well, good morning. Is it still morning?
Yes, it's lunchtime maybe?
All right.
Yeah.
So,
Good morning.
thanks everyone for coming today and for joining us. A little while ago, about a week ago, Goldman Sachs released studies saying that the cost for building out the U.S. battery supply chain just for private industry is $3 trillion. This is what private industry will have to spend by 2030 to build out from mines all the way to EVs. But so far, industry has committed between $100 billion and $200 billion. Where is the rest going to come from? How will that be shaken loose? How does it come off the sidelines? And then there's another question that the number of big companies, big entrepreneurs who have stepped up to the plate and said, I'm going to start a lithium mine, a nickel mine, a cobalt mine, refining, and so forth, are very few. How does the system motivate those people to come off the sidelines and make this industry happen? And the third question is, how do you make these industries cool so that our very best young people are not going to Wall Street, to Goldman Sachs, to McKinsey, or to Silicon Valley, to Google, Meta, Tesla, whatever? How do you motivate them and think that it's cool to do batteries? So Jim Litinsky, CEO and founder of MP Materials, is specifically specialized in these very topics. So we're going to dig into that. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you. Good to be here.
All right.
Thanks for having me.
So let's dive in. We have very few minutes.
Okay.
So we're going to cover everything. Okay. So the first thing is, so you come from a money background.
That's right. Yeah.
Right, a finance background. So let's start with that.
Yeah.
So how do we get $3 trillion off the sidelines and into this field very, very quickly?
By the way, Steve, so 3 trillion, that sounds so easy. That same Goldman Sachs research that you're referring to suggested it would be 10 trillion a decade to do all of electrification. So that 3 was just for EVs and EV supply chain. So this is actually a much bigger issue on the table than just the EVs. But to answer your question, it's a real challenge. This is a new kind of challenge for us as a country and for entrepreneurs and young people out there, because this, if we step back, mining and materials and stuff, but particularly mining and materials, it's a hard business, right? It's, typical copper mine takes 10 to 15 years to come online. Obviously, there are permitting challenges. It requires a lot of capital. And I always jokingly say to my team, show me a project, go out, get 3 estimates, add them up, and that's what it'll cost, right? And so you have this challenge where investors are looking at what needs to occur, but there's a lot more execution risk in a typical deal or situation than maybe the seller wants to be in the price. And so you have a challenge to raise capital on top of that, because it is a very challenging business that is tough from a capital standpoint. You're obviously interacting with regulators, and it's real stuff, it's real people. And if you look at, I was looking at this stat with my team, the top 25 hedge funds, which should be kind of some of the most opportunistic capital. Top 25 hedge funds, if you look at their 13Fs, way underexposed in materials. And so you see this on Wall Street. There's an institutional reluctance to make investments in this area because, for all of the reasons that I just stated. I would say, though, that also creates the opportunity, right? The best opportunities of a generation are very often, not so obvious at the time, and it's only in hindsight that they're obvious. And by the time everyone's gone there, it's not as exciting anymore. But for us, and we talked about my story, we can talk more about my story, but I'm an accidental industrialist, right? I ran a hedge fund for 15 years. I had a lot of fun doing it. It was great, and it's a multi-billion-dollar fund. I certainly didn't need to leave that business. But I came across MP. This was a failed mining and materials project. The predecessor had invested $2 billion. We owned some of the distressed debt, and I expected the people behind me to own it. Didn't really think about it too much. Then all of a sudden, this thing was in complete free fall. The site was shut down. It was in care and maintenance. There were 8 people, and I was in a Delaware court. And the next thing I heard is they're going to just reclaim this site. So all of a sudden, this world-class asset that also is a national security asset was literally hours away from losing its permit. And you lose your permit in the state of California for a mine, good luck.
Right.
So, all of a sudden, I just couldn't believe it. And frankly, I was maybe wearing my American hat a little bit more. I couldn't believe that no one would step up to do this. So we kicked in a couple $1 million just to keep the 8 people in care and maintenance, to keep it going. And then, of course, the rest is history. We can talk about our story. MP's public now, but the approximate $30-something million investment that me and my investors made, resulted in a multi-billion-dollar gain. So it was a tremendous economic success, but hopefully, and obviously, we've created a lot of jobs, and now we're building a great company. We're very proud of the platform we have, and we think we're just getting started. But the point is there's also opportunity there. But it was years of pain. It was very hard. These are hard projects, and they're ones of scale. So it's a different kind of entrepreneur story. And so, we can kind of talk about that, but, why don't I stop there and let you?
Yeah. No, I want to jump in. I wanted to jump in, but it's pretty interesting. Okay, so LG just announced it is building yet another 2 gigafactories in the Western United States, LFP and NMC. By 25, 26, that's very fast, right? 2 or 3 years, they're going to have both complete. $5.3 billion. So this is what we're talking about. You want to start up a new project, that's what you're talking about. $5 billion, it's going to go up.
Right.
So what's the reality in terms of, if you're like someone here, we'll pick someone from the audience and make them start a factory. How do they get that $5 billion?
So mining today is actually, it's super easy if you just go into crypto mining, right? Requires no capital. But, I think that party has ended. But jokingly, it goes back to, if we think of the Cold War, think of the mindset during the Cold War versus sort of the last 20 years when we were essentially, unrivaled. The kinds of folk, and obviously there's always been, people going to Wall Street, where Wall Street's always going to get talent, and that's great. But I think there was a greater appreciation for going into industries that had, what I'll call externalities, right? Positive benefits for the nation, whether it's certain kinds of engineering or the sciences or rocketry and that kind of stuff. We're back into that era in a way. And so I think for the talent, we need to start thinking in that way, which is this is not a problem where we're going to have, a Silicon Valley-led boom where there's going to be thousands of companies and, pets.com and whatever this cycle. But we're going to need national champions. And by national champions, I don't mean, government-backed companies. I don't mean companies where, it's sort of heads I win, tails you lose. But we're going to need to create the conditions for companies like, for example, and I'm just connecting in MP, I say to my team, we should think of ourselves like Intel 1970, right? We are in the precipice of an enormous boom where rare earth magnets are going to be pervasive. It's not just EVs, it's drones, it's robots. There'll be a robot dog in every home, whatever. And so the opportunity is there. What makes this different than, a software company or a crypto company is that it requires enormous scale. And so it's multi-billion dollars of investment, and it takes time, and it's painstaking, but the opportunity is there. But I think to reference LG, I think if we're going to solve this problem as a country, and you think of those numbers that Goldman's talking about, we're going to need platforms, right? We're going to need places where talent can go. As I always like to say to the team, scale begets scale, talent begets talent. And so we're going to need to find some leaders. And again, hopefully we at MP are part of the solution, but we need others. We're going to have companies of this scale that can make these investments, that can raise capital at scale, and can execute, and can also deal with the inherent volatility that any single commodity may have or that any single project may have. And so it's not about just handing out money to 100 different projects that are a couple people in a garage. That's great, and I'm all for support, but we really need to create the conditions for scaled companies tackling this problem, but again in the utmost private market way.
Yeah, so it's been obvious for, I don't know how many, a number of years that this is going to happen. This gold rush that we're seeing right now, that it was going to happen. And we have Elon Musk, we have Jim Litinsky, and where, right, when 1848 happened, everyone on their own rushed to Sutter's Creek, out to, they didn't need, right, to be told. When cars became a thing at the beginning of the 20th century, everyone, right, there were thousands really of car companies, and so I am puzzled. I'm mystified by the dearth of those kinds of people.
It's a great point, Steve, and actually I recently made the prediction, and maybe this is sort of a little blunt, but I think in the next 3 years we will see at least one, if not more, major OEMs, household names, fail, go bankrupt, need a bailout due to this supply chain issue. I think you may see it in Europe first, where, for example, the Chinese OEMs, the Chinese electric vehicle makers, are outselling the Europeans in Europe. I think certainly we had Jeff Morrison on the stage earlier today, and I think GM has been a leader in moving upstream in the supply chain. So there are stories of companies that are forward thinking, and then there are a lot of companies that are just not. Everyone sees the investment, right? Before we even get to the trillions, there's hundreds of billions that are already coming from the OEMs. Mm-hmm. It's happening. You see it. It's reported. It's invested. But that's. Let's get topical, right? Look at and again, regardless of your politics, look at a Silicon Valley bank. I think everybody knew that interest rate was a risk, right? There are some that were on the wrong side of that risk, and there were others that were on the right side of that risk, and I guess right and wrong. And so I think this issue is the same thing, and I think you're going to see it. And I just hope that we as a country, or in our politics, and if it's one of our OEMs that fails, or it's in Europe, they don't say, how could we have known? This is unfair. This is, and punish the good players for what the bad players are now doing, because everyone should be focused on this issue, right? You can do the math, and it doesn't foot. The music will stop. I guess to think of the Chuck Prince analogy in the subprime crisis, right? The music will stop, but then, there's some that are still dancing, but there won't be enough chairs for everybody. And so I do think we're going to see this happen. And when it happens, though, hopefully you'll remember this moment, and because it's clear as day that we will see crises over this. But the good news is there are people who are focused on this issue, and we just need a lot more of it.
Yeah. There is going to be blood on the floor. There's going to be consolidation. Yeah. Like we saw with the oil industry during the 1990s. I wanted to, this is a very short time, a lot of ground to cover. I wanted to cover the talent issue. You touched on that. And so from soup to nuts, from the mine all the way through to the EVs and banks, VC, all of that. When I talk to companies in each one of those spheres, one of the issues that all of them raises, where am I going to get people, my labor? Where am I going to get people to work for me? And it's people who are going to be the Jim Litinskys, but it's also people who are going to work as assemblers in the plants. But So I have 2 daughters of college age. Neither of them has mentioned to me, I want to work in a lithium refinery. And so how do you make this cool?
Yeah, it's a great question, and the good thing, at least about this topic, is that you're talking about an enormous number of jobs, right? This is, if for all of those who believe that the last 20 years we've seen sort of a, somewhat of a hollowing out of our manufacturing base, and I know you've mentioned some stats around, what wages were in the 60s and 70s, and we think about, good middle class engineering and manufacturing jobs. The best part of this is that this will be a return to that, right? But on top of that, there are going to be, we just don't have them. We're constantly looking for more metallurgists, more engineers, and there's going to be a shortage of this, which means wages and the economic opportunity will go up. How we accelerate that, I think we need more economic success stories, right? I think we need to continue to work on this issue that hopefully I've outlined a little bit, which is let's create the conditions to have a level playing field for our companies to succeed in this space. We were talking earlier about CATL, and they, a few weeks ago, people might not have noticed, but they announced that they were cutting prices for the Chinese OEMs that were going to continue on their platform, but they weren't making that price available. They were going to subsidize the lithium cost for their OEMs, but they weren't making that available for even Tesla in China or other global OEMs. And so as we think about this supply chain issue, it's an enormous economic issue because it's not just the upstream commodity, it's the whole stream means the jobs and the GDP downstream. And so when we start thinking about that issue, the economics will be there. And I do believe when the economics are there, the people will show, right? And so, certainly I would say this to anyone. I would say this to your daughters if they ask for advice, but you don't need to go into the industry that all your friends are going into, right? If you think of the great, success stories, it's very often the people who are contrarian or go into something that appears much more challenging that are actually solving problems. I'm a big believer that, certainly as an entrepreneur with respect to MP, if you solve something, a problem that the world really needs solved, the rewards are enormous. And so what I would say is if we can educate people and get that commitment and just say, hey, this is a real problem. We need to really outline it better for people, and we need more people to go into this, and here's why, and there's going to be great economic opportunity, and here's the support that we're giving these industries, and the IRA is a good start in that. I think we need to do some more. But I do think that the talent will then come. I think the market will start showing those stories. But we have a long way to go. I mean, we're behind.
Yeah. It'll be our children and their children. Still, this will still be going on. We have run out of time.
Oh.
Jim, thanks so much for spending this time with us.
Thank you.
Please say thanks to Jim.
Thanks all.
All right.